Hello, writers and crafters. I'm Valerie Isan.
And I'm Eric Mertz.
And this is episode 63 of the podcast. It's April 5th, 2022, as we record this. And our main topic today is emotional tone. Our podcast is sponsored by our patrons at patreon.com/Valerie Isan. You can still get some announcements in on the podcast and free books and accountability Zoom calls and scene analysis. And it all starts at $1 a month. So check out patreon.com/Valerie Isan. What's been going on, Eric?
What's been going on? Got a lot of writing.
What are you writing right now?
I am actually, I'm through a draft on Chasing Shadows, the next book in my series, and it's getting through the writers group, and I've got a big bunch of edits to do. But I started this week just kind of powering through the first draft of the next book that comes after.
What about the one you told us about 2 weeks ago? I think it was 2 weeks ago. You're telling us about the Sandoval story.
So that I'm gonna do. So the actual mystery series follows Sheriff Melville. It's his main storyline. I wrote a backstory book for Gilbert Sandoval, who is kind of like Melville's emerging partner in paranormal research.
I think we should call that a prequel, not a backstory book.
Well, backstory, right? I'm searching for the word. Prequel. It's not really a prequel, right? I wrote the book of that character's backstory, and he's not really the main character in the series. So is that still a prequel?
Yeah, it happened before. It happened before Melville met Sandoval.
Interesting. Add this to the podcast thing. Like, what defines a prequel? Because I really think of the prequel as main character, book one. Read book one, read book one, read book one. Here's the prequel. Okay, so this would be the prequel for one of the characters in the story. That is an untitled book that I haven't really finished yet. Pretty close. But I got so into like the idea of what comes after Chasing Shadows, started writing the next story. And I got really fired up and into it. And I think I did like 16,000 words since last week. It was
wow, that's cool.
Not a big word count person, but I just got fired up. The story starts with a house fire, so like I can't help but like make that. I'm thinking of calling it Burning Shadow, which is not the most inspired title ever at this point, but it's just.
So you're trying to keep shadow in the titles. So there's permanent shadows, chasing shadows, and then burning shadows.
Maybe Burning Shadows. I don't love it. It kind of sounds like a bad metal band you'd see at the fair or something. I don't know yet. This will be something I'll ask readers if they like the title or not. I'll come up and do a poll. But yeah, I'm definitely trying to take the series in a more intense sort of an intense direction.
So how are you at writing new fiction and then editing old fiction? Like, you're not just line editing at this point. You're still like revising and making tweaks to Chasing Shadows, right?
Yeah. So based on,
you're writing 2 books at once. Then how can you do that? I'm a one book at a time kind of person.
They're at 2 different stages. So they occupy, there's like the part of me that just has to like, step onto the stage and just ad lib. I have an outline, but I have to just get in there and like, I know this starts with an apartment fire. I know that it involves this. I have to start putting that together. It's more of like writing by appetite. Like I need to get something rough out there.
Okay.
When I feel, and I know this each morning when I'm getting into it, like if I'm feeling a little bit more like a little tighter, like I want to fix something, I'll do more of the editing kind of thing. And I can usually push myself in one direction or another. I haven't really started doing the edits to Chasing Shadows yet. I'm waiting till my writers group gets through with it. That will be mid-May. I will then, when I'm really that book, when I'm getting into it, rewriting it, I am going to that's all I will do for a few weeks. That's all I'm going to do.
Okay. I'm always curious how people manage multiple projects, because it sounds good, like if you're kind of missing the mark on one day, you can just switch projects and do something else. I love that idea, but I don't know. I must have some sort of like finishing energy that I
Energy,
need
right?
to like, I have to get this done first before I can start something new. I don't know.
There's definitely a side of me that just has to, at some point, I would just think of it like a musician that's just got to like get up there and just jam or
Hmm.
improvise or something. I have to do it because it's getting too tight in editing for too long is just like confining. So,
It's a different part of your brain for sure.
right. What about you? What are you working on?
So still the memoir. And I think last week I talked, or 2 weeks ago, I guess I talked about the finishing Melissa Phoebos's book about
Right.
and realizing, oh no.
Oh
So
no.
I've just been collecting phrases that, you were talking about last week about capturing on your phone when you're
Right.
walking the dog and stuff. So I've been jotting down when things come to my head, little messages to myself to, put this part in. And I really, really loved when you talked about the episode on villains,
Right.
the parallel storylines of the villain and the protagonist. And in this memoir, the villain, I guess for lack of a better word, is that force of antagonism. And that's, I think I I thought it was one thing, but I'm thinking now it's fear of judgment. I think
Mm,
maybe that is what creates all of the choices that the main character um, battles with. And so at this point in the memoir writing, I'm just realizing that I need to find those darker, deeper places that I have either deliberately or unintentionally left out of the drafting process. So I think it might be time to go back into some journals from back then and start excavating and finding some other stuff that will trigger some deeper writing, because my fear is that the manuscript as it stands now, which I thought was pretty much done-ish, it needed the
right.
line edits, but
Interesting.
I think it's too surface, and I
Mm.
think it needs another level or two, and that means harder work, and it's the
So
stage
now here's
where, yeah.
my turn to ask you, because you asked me how do I write multiple things. They're fiction. It's easy for me to be into fake stories. Um, well, not real things, right? They're not real things that happen.
Right.
But so I've actually considered writing a memoir. Have a career in social work that I think would be interesting to capture. How is it for you when you get to like a place of how do you separate the your life part from the part that like the writing part of it? When you look at the story you're telling and you say, I haven't added this or I haven't done that, how do you separate, like, you're talking about part of your life, right? And like how do you like objectively look at the writing about your life, that you see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
It's hard
Yeah.
for me to ask, but go ahead.
So the rough draft, you just put everything out on the page. So it's just you and the page, and you're just telling your story, and you don't
Right.
worry about, did I put this in? And it's just like any other novel that you write. You get the draft out first, and then you go in with the editor brain and you
Mm.
look at it a little more objectively. So yeah, just get it all out. And then I can um I s- I always try to use third person pronouns. So I don't talk about, when I'm talking about the book with other people, and
Right.
even when I'm looking through it myself with the editor hat on, I'm looking at what the protagonist choices are, and what she is doing in this scene. So I try to give myself that level of separation there.
Right. Let's say
And
separation.
yeah, and also in some cases you already have a lot of separation. I'm writing about stuff that happened like 15 years ago, so there
Right.
is separation there. So and that's part of the problem, I guess. Like, it's not raw enough right now, so that's what I need to
Got it.
get back into that more raw place and put that in there, because now it's just a story of a story, and I want it to be deeper than that. So then the other thing I would use for that separation, if you're trying to edit and get into, did I put that in the scene and blah, 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 is using tools like the story rubric, because it's very objective. And, today we're going to talk about emotional tone. And so you can objectively decide, is this manuscript, have that level of emotional tone, or is the character in this scene, which is yourself, but is the character in this scene have natural highs and lows, or whatever, so it just, using tools makes it more objective, I think. So I guess that would be my answer.
I find this, I had a career in social work. I still have a foot in that world, and I wanted to write a memoir about it, but every time I think about it, that's where I become the writer who struggles over every sentence. There's a constraint there, and I think that's because with fiction, I feel like I can wing it. I can just make up what happens, because I'm focusing more on the emotional journey, the tone of the scene, all those things. If I'm going to go back into my life, I'm going to have a hard time saying like, oh, I'm just going to wing it. We'll just see what that Eric guy did in that situation. But there's another topic another day.
Another topic. Yeah. There's a lot more I could say about that. But
I'm sure you could. And I will definitely be sending you that manuscript, because there's no one I would trust more.
Aw. Well, let's talk about emotional tone. Why don't we start with a definition? So what is emotional tone?
Boy, can I ask you that quick? Can I turn that question back around to you? Because
sure.
I think I don't know how to narrow it down, really.
I think it's a cross between like the vibe in the room. I think it's kind of that just sense of what's going on in the room. Yeah, basically that's it. If you have any empathy strengths as a human, and you walk into a party and you, or not a party, but you walk into a room where there's several people in there, and you kind of just judge the room, and you see like, okay, who's upset, or who's, so that's that same kind of thing I think of when I'm judging the emotional tone of the manuscript or the scene. And then
I think,
and then I think that it needs to change over the course of the story too. So yeah, I think it's kind of a cross between the emotional vibe in the room and almost theme. Ooh, I don't want to say that because that's such a buzzy word, and it really doesn't have to do with emotional tone, but kind of it does, because for instance, like Charlotte's Web by E.B. White, we all know that Wilbur's afraid of dying, and he's and he's got this spider friend, and
he has good reason to fear dying. He's a pig on a farm. He's got a lot. Yeah, okay, just say it.
So it's kind of a sad tale, because Charlotte doesn't live, but it's also about peace and acceptance, and there's sweet things that happen, and it's farm life, and there's tension, of course, and conflict, but it's a sweet little story, so that's kind of like the emotional tone.
Right.
Whereas opposed to some, H.P. Lovecraft is going to have a totally different, emotional tone.
Right. Yeah. I think I was where I'm glad I kind of forced you to go first, because I have to like deliberately extract the theme from that when I think of it, because emotional tone is different scene to scene, moment to moment, right? In a book, it has to modulate and change. Like even in a happy, uplifting book, there has to be a moment of tension, a moment of stress. Right.
Otherwise, it's boring. Tone.
Otherwise, it's boring. But I think sometimes what I have a hard time with is like just separating. I have to deliberately separate the unifying theme of the book from the emotional tone of the book. Emotional tones in the scenes. See what I'm saying? I have a hard time separating those things. You don't?
No, say that again.
So when I think of emotional tone, I naturally attach that to the overall, like to the theme of the book.
Okay.
A lot of the times.
Okay.
And that unfortunately ties, like it's too big. I think emotional tone is different. If there's an overarching emotional tone of a book, like you're saying with Charlotte's Web, it's a sweet story, but there has to be some variety in the book. So while the theme remains, a unified banner over the top, the emotional tone has to vary and move around.
Yeah. So there's
Right.
emotional tone of the story, of the book, of the manuscript, and then there's emotional tone of the characters, scene by scene.
Right. Scene by scene. Right.
Yeah. So it's kind of like I'm gonna blank on his name now. Bill from Seattle. He did the talk about the three arcs of a story, the narrative arc. Bill Kennewer in
Okay.
Seattle.
Yeah.
Yeah, William Kennewer. So yeah, he talked about the arcs, the three arcs of the story. There's the narrative arc, the person that's telling the story. There's the story arc, you know, the plot
Right.
and what's happening there, and then that emotional arc or the character
Right.
arc. So yeah, that's all. That makes sense to me. Thanks for
Right.
explaining it.
So emotional tone, like when I was thinking of this topic when it came up on our calendar, I thought of the elements in a scene by scene, scene by scene, what makes the emotional tone, like how, a writer has to decide has to know what the emotional tone of a scene is going to be. It has to be appropriate, right? If you're going to write Charlotte's Web, you can't, and you want that book that's going to stay in that range of emotional tones from scene to scene, you're not going to add something horrific,
Right.
something confrontational or something frightening. I joked about Wilbur, he's afraid of death, he's on a farm. Like, you're not going to really confront that fear too heavily.
So in a underdeveloped emotional tone of a story, it's just there won't be an emotional tone. Like the reader won't pick up on the vibe in the room. It's going to be inconsistent. It's going to be kind of all over the place. And the reader's not going to know, like, okay, how am I supposed to feel? When you decide to sit down and watch a movie at the end of the night, you start, at least I do, with, okay, this is the mood I'm in right now.
Right.
What do I need?
How I want to feel.
What do I want to experience from this movie? So if a reader opens up your book and they're like, okay, the outside of the book said it's going to be like this. That's why I chose this book. So let's sit down and get into that place. And if that emotional tone doesn't match and it's kind of all over the place, the reader's going to feel all kind of icky, like just
Right.
sort of weirded out. Like it's jarring, it's unnatural, or something's happened and it's just not what they expected and not in a good way.
Right.
So
right.
that would be underdeveloped, I would say.
Right. Right. It's a whole character that has a whole journey through a book, but we're only going to focus on one emotional note of that journey, right? So your character doesn't have a romantic interest. They don't have aspirations. They're just.
You're still talking about the underdeveloped.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's what I think of it. Right. So
yeah.
It is a little with Melville. It's not unnatural. I shouldn't say it's unnatural to be writing his emerging love story, but I have to remind myself, I'm creating a whole person's journey through a long string of stories. There are scenes where he's frightened. The tone is harrowing or depressing, or it's going to be in that tone. It's frightening. I just keep coming back to frightening because I just wrote kind of a spooky scene today. Mm-hmm. But we also need to show that what's he living for, right? The emotional tone of the scenes with the girlfriend need to be, he's aspiring to find love. He's trying to open himself up. So,
and I really love the subplot of the devotion and love for his brother too. I really like that subplot.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Right. But those are different, right? So having characters in long-term, if you're going to have a long-term relationship with a character in a book, you want to see more of their life than just then they fall in love and then they live happily ever after. You need to, in our lives, or think of the emotional tone of your life. It's jagged. It's not
it is
a straight line.
And when some people get into the weeds a little bit more. So some people will take a scene that they have written, and when they're in the editing mode, they look and see. So the scene starts with the character in this positive place. And that means at the end of the scene, then it needs to change into a negative, or vice versa. If you're being chased by the monster at the beginning of the scene, then at the end of the scene, like, it needs to be a little more up. It can't be negative to negative. It can be negative to even more negative, but it can't be flatlined.
Yeah.
And it can't be So, if you do a good job of establishing the emotional tone of the story and you think, okay, I got it, this is great, and you're writing it in, it does, like you said, have to change. It can't be a
Right.
flat line. It has to change through the story. So,
Right.
maybe that would be like maybe the fair category on the story rubric. Like you've got
Right.
emotional tone, but it just isn't going anywhere. And
Right.
that's boring too.
Yeah, and I think that I think what you said about beginning and ending a scene, not ending beginning and ending a scene in the same place is critical too, right? Because you character entering an experience, if it's an, I always ask the question when I'm designing scenes or I'm coming up with ideas. When I'm on this side of my desk handwriting, I always ask myself why, right?
Mhm.
So if we're going to look at 30 scenes from a character's life and that those scenes take place over maybe a 2-week span of the book story, I'm just winging it here, but why am I showing you that scene? What is what is that scene, but why does that scene belong in the book? And I think you have to answer that question of like, it's transformative in some way. They either character learns something they didn't have, they start the story, scene speculative, they end the scene informed,
Mhm.
or they start the scene speculative, they were wrong, it's a down. And so I think when you map those scenes and you're asking yourself, why does this belong here? Part of it is does it have like an emotional, where does it fit emotionally? Does it
Mhm.
advance the plot and do something to that emotional effect of the story? I think sometimes purely functional scenes are, that move the plot forward. I hear that a lot, like, oh, it moves the plot forward, but does it really move the
So
story
Becca's sign.
forward?
Does it really?
Oh, did I? Oh no, I stole somebody's line. Um,
No, I don't know. I like it though. Yeah,
so I think
I
that's,
agree.
yeah, that's something to consider. Um,
And I don't ever really know when to do that kind of deep scene work. Like at this point in my book right now, I thought I was about ready to start that. And now I need to go add in, more drafting, I guess. But I think at some point after you feel like you've got a real good handle on the story and it's complete beginning to end, you know, then I think it's time to go in. I think that's probably
right,
when you would go in scene by scene and like, where's the conflict? What's the choice of this scene? What's the consequence? Does it have that negative to
right,
positive? Is it really
yeah,
doing something in the story? Yeah, I
yeah.
think I think that deeper work comes like after you have pretty much the book written.
I don't know. I think yes and no. I think that to me, I think you sharpen it there.
Hmm.
Like right now, I'm working on a sequence of scenes that take place. So in the current draft, Melville has to go out of town to do an interview, and he's interviewing kind of, he's interviewing in the someone who's involved in this paranormal conspiracy that he's, so this isn't official police work. So he takes his girlfriend and they're going on a little hour country, drive into the country where he's going to go interview someone. So when I mapped this scene out, I thought, okay, here's the sequence of scenes. I thought, okay, in this story beat, Melville is going to start this needing to know what's going on here. So the information, he's going to learn something. Um, but he's with this new love in his life. So there is also, while he's on the journey to learn something, I needed to do something with the character of Christy, who's his girlfriend. That set him, to me, it set him on a different direction, right? So in the course of this drive, this isn't spoiling any, well, it's not spoiling anything, but he tells her, or she tells him, I'm sorry, that she's been accepted into an art program that would take her like out of a residency, like our previous topic.
Hmm.
So he starts out with this, I'm going to learn something. So he's going to go from uninformed to informed, but he's also like, I'm with my girlfriend for the day. This is going to be fun. But then she tells him something that, oh no, like I'm
Oh.
worried. So what I did there was, for emotional tone, like when she tells him this, they're in a town and they're going to go out to have some lunch, and the place isn't open. They're waiting for the place to open. The building is gray. Everything is very like, in
There's world
between.
building and
Right.
setting.
Right. So like, but I thought like, so to keep this emotional tone, like where he's he's trying to be happy for her because she's pursuing something, but he also is like internally struggling with losing her. So like those kind of things, like when you're setting emotional tone, you can do a lot of work using, like you said, setting and world building to enhance it. He goes out for this investigation, to this investigation. He's got to drive up a hill. There's potholes in the road. Like it's a struggle, so I want to create that feeling of like, here's more of this emotional tone. Like to get there, he's really got to push. The person he's talking to is hurt. So like there's little ways that it's the main character's action, but it's also like how you want to showcase that world, right? If you want to capture that sort of somber, am I going to keep her, am I going to lose her feeling, you don't want to put a bunch of bright colors and shiny things. You want to stay in that somber tone, right?
I'm really glad that you went into the weeds on this, because that was going to be my next question. Like, so how do you write emotional tone? What's involved in writing that? So we've got the scene building, the world building. Yeah. So, like weather, or like you said, the color of the buildings. Right. And then what else? Like, how else do we
activity? I think activity is big. You can create some contrast there, but I think if you're, again, in that in-between world, I was actually going to write it that they had the conversation in the restaurant, but I thought this would be so much better if they're waiting. It's 10:55. They have to wait 5 minutes for it to open. There is this angst,
Oh, yeah,
and now is when she chooses to tell him, hey, I had some great news. Before you picked me up, I got a call. So you're using sort of like, you set the character up. Everybody knows what it feels like to wait for something to open. You're standing around outside. You can't fill that space. A writer can fill that space with something.
I also really like the conflict there too. Like, oh, I've got great news. So he's like, oh yay, I'm so excited. Right. What's this great news? I love you. I want to share this great news with you. Oh no, like that would be a huge nosedive.
Yeah.
Wow, that's great. You're a great writer, Eric.
Oh, please. Oh, am I? I don't know. But I think that there's a lot of that is happy accident. I think if you're in that emotional space with the character, and you have that scene in mind, then
I think that's the kicker, is being in the same emotional space as the character. So this is method acting, people, there's that writing exercise that goes around every few years where you have a scene, and you're told the parameters of the setting, So you have a setting, and then you're told that you just found out that your father passed away, and describe the room you're in. Or you're a little kid and you tasted ice cream for the first time in your life and you're super excited, describe the room you're in. And you're just in the same exact room, but the emotional tone is totally different. And so that means that the visuals and the sounds and the smell, like everything is going to look different and feel different to the reader based on that shared emotional experience with the author and the character. Bam, bam, bam.
Right. And I think there's something key to that too, is I think you might, as a writer, say to yourself, well, gosh, it's just like the writer, right? To make this, like to construct a scene that it sometimes feels like you're constructing a farce. But really, if you're in the emotional state of that character, then you know how it is when you get bad news. Suddenly, like you said, if you find out your father died, the room changes. Suddenly you don't hear the joy in the laughter anymore.
You see different things, and you're certainly feeling different things too. Your hands are all sweaty and you're feeling sick to your stomach. And I mean, I don't know.
When you are anticipating, I actually interviewed a police officer. I said, what's it like when you're going up to the house and and they're gonna what is that feeling like? And he said, do you remember saying, like, I remember I pick up every detail, right? If there's a shoe on the porch, I pick it up. So he became very acutely aware. I took that to like
receiving the news is just the opposite, just so you know.
Right. Yeah, you blank out. You completely blank.
You can't hear anything, and you do pick up one thing or that thing and disjointed sentences. And
I always focus on something absurd across the room. I'm just like, oh my God, I'm getting the worst news ever. that statue has a really weird, hat,
Hmm.
and I'll just
Yeah.
focus on that as I'm hearing all the bad news.
Yep.
But if you're in that emotional, so one of the things I do to just take myself out of that feeling that I'm creating a bunch of circumstantial, things around a character to accentuate that mood is that we're only describing what's relevant. And if we're in that character's head, then you're showing me what that character finds relevant. And in that moment, they're looking at all the things that fit their emotional state, right?
Hmm.
When you're
Hmm.
joyous, like the room is full and you can, when she says like, I love you, everything
Yeah.
comes out. So I think being in that character head, and look, I had to method act a little bit. I told Elijah not to come down tonight this morning to say goodbye because I just wanted to stay in that focused mood. Like you can do a little method acting, get in there,
Hmm.
like what's the emotional memory? Have an emotional memory that fits the scene and give it
Yeah,
that because it's real.
it is. And that's, yeah. I was telling somebody else, about the stuff I need to add to the manuscript now. And I said that when I wrote my first memoir, I can remember scenes where I am crying as I'm writing it. And in my
Right.
novel, I remember sitting at a table in a cafe and crying as I'm writing. And I haven't had that experience in this memoir. So I know
Really?
that there is not enough emotional resonance, with the character
Hmm.
who happens to be me.
Right. Oh
But
man,
yeah,
I'm intimidated about writing a memoir. Truly. I
there's
am.
tricks. There's tricks.
I'm
It's
sure.
good stuff.
Method acting. I mean,
Method acting, yeah, with yourself.
what was my
That's
emotional
meta.
memory? I'm
Okay.
mining my own emotional memory.
So we've come up with some really good ways to create emotional tone in the story. So and having characters experience those emotional peaks and valleys throughout the story, and even in scenes too, like the
Right.
waiting and the getting the good news / bad news. And that's really going to keep the reader engaged, and that's really going to increase your pacing too, I think. And it
I
really
think
affects
so.
the pacing. So if you've got good pacing, I think a lot of these things, when writers get the feedback from editors, they're often like, oh my God, there's just
Just
such a
no,
giant
they
list.
don't.
And
Of course they
and
do.
that's totally normal. But knowing that if you fix the dialogue, then that affects the character development. And if
Right.
you fix the emotional tone, then that's going to change the pacing. And so it's all interwoven.
Yes.
And
Yes.
a lot of these things kind of self-resolve once you focus on one thing. So in terms of editing, I would say like picking the most useful thing, like the thing that sticks out the most. If you fix that thing, then a lot of the other things might just not even need attention. And that would be lovely.
Right.
But yeah.
And I think I was going to say, like, from that, like, something self resolved. And this is also, God, this is like Eric Witchy talking here, but it's a skill that you develop, right? I
Hmm.
think that if you're writing your first draft and you look at that first scene, your first scene is probably going to be flat compared to your last scene because you're learning the character, you're learning how to add those elements that
The
you
first
that
scene
you've
might even
only
be cut.
right.
You might
If
not even
you're
use
smart,
it.
if you're smart, you will just cut the first scene and find the first good one and start there. But I think that, like, I think when as a new writer or as a learning writer, I think there's this, again, it's like we talked about in the last one, there's this mountain of, there's all these resources. Well, there's all these skills. You do get better at them. You do
Hmm.
find it becomes natural. And immersing in a character isn't easy to do the first time. And putting yourself in another person's emotional shoes long enough to write their life isn't easy. But you find tricks, you find ways to do it. So
I
um,
think one of the best ways to find that place to strive to in your writing, whether it's the scene you're writing that day, or it's the book in general, or in your writing career as an author, or whatever, the place that I strive for is, what do I want the writer to feel when they read this?
you mean the
Or
reader? What do you want?
what did I say?
The
Writer?
writer. What did you want
Oh,
the writer to feel?
no, I want the reader.
Right,
Thank
the
you.
reader. Yeah.
What do I want the reader to feel when they read
Right.
whatever I've written, through all of my books or through the scene that they're reading right there. What is it that I want the reader, oh my gosh, what do I want the reader to feel?
Yeah.
And what I really want them to have is an experience. I want
Right.
them to see themselves in the work. I want them to take away messages of whatever whether it's inspiration or, I'm so glad I'm alive, or whatever the book is about, whatever theme,
Yeah.
that you've written, and you want that to be the takeaway message for the reader. But I think it's really important for the reader to see themselves in the work, to connect in some way. Maybe not in, I'm a 50-year-old sheriff in a small town in Oregon that
Right.
sees things he doesn't want to see.
Right.
Maybe we can't connect to that, but maybe we can connect to, he's got a disabled brother, or,
Right.
he's got,
He wants
a
the truth.
girlfriend, or like readers will be able to hook on to something that really resonates with them and makes them love the story they're in, because they can see themselves in that story.
Right. I think
And
you hit on the key. Like you nailed something right in the beginning of that I like gave me a little chill. It's that experience. You want to give the reader, not the writer. Sorry. I had to make you laugh. You want to give the reader an experience unlike they've ever had, that they can relate to, right? Like they can see themselves in an experience they've never had. That's the journey of storytelling to me. When I read my 7-year-old kid a book, we're reading Narnia right now, which I love dearly, so dearly. But he's sitting there reading it, and like you can tell, like he's just like he's on this crazy adventure, turning into a dragon or doing the weird things the kids are doing in his head. That is storytelling. He can relate to it, but it's an unlike him. He's never going to become a dragon. Well, I don't know what will happen in his future, but odds are he's never going to turn into a dragon. So emotional, yeah, that's like, we're emotional creatures, and like if we have to, as writers, have to appeal to an array of reader emotions. Otherwise, again, you get that flat book, flat story that's like, eh.
Right
Bringing
on.
up the kid too is just, again, like another little end note is like if you're reading to kids, you can really start to see when they start layering emotion into stories, right? It's not in the beginning. It's like shapes, it's shapes, then it's rudimentary characters, then it's rudimentary characters doing something. That was a big turn on for me when I started to realize, oh, look, this is the very beginning of adding an emotional through line to a story. A character wants something, a character needs something, a character gets obstacles, and you can kind of see the way the story changes, and it unlocks something to see that kind of layering.
Very cool. And yeah, I think that's a great place to end on emotional tone. I feel warm and fuzzy.
I do. The sun,
This
if you're watching us on YouTube, you can see the sun just came out over my shoulder.
Yay. The emotional tone of this podcast episode is brought to you by the sun shining in through the window.
Well, let's bring our listeners from from where they started up. It is, we'll put a bow on it by saying it's necessary, but you have the power to do it. And it is something you can get better at. If you just got feedback from an editor and it said, this needs more, give it another shot. The second draft will be better. They resolve themselves when you look at the story holistically, like Val said. I think you'll get there.
Yeah. And there's fun in the journey of getting there, I think. And you learn about yourself. And that's part of why I'm a writer, and definitely a reader. I learn about myself a lot when I read.
Right. Yeah, that's true. I mean, I would say majority of the things I've learned in my life, I feel like come from, books, characters,
Yeah, for sure.
Saved me from having to do some impossible things. Thank you, writers out there.
Thanks so much for talking about this, but this was a fun one. I really liked this conversation.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, me too. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Writers and crafters, see you next week.
Have a great writing week.
Bye now.